So welcome to the Literary Agent panel. It's very good to see you all this afternoon. Just in case any of you weren't here this morning, I'm just going to introduce myself again. So I'm Rose Kigwana. I'm the new Chief Executive of Creative Future, and this is one of our amazing events. So I'll be hosting this panel session today. There'll be a chance for you to ask questions towards the end. But what I'm going to do is introduce you to the lovely people on the stage here, and they will talk a little bit about themselves, and I'll ask them some questions, and then there'll be time for you to ask some questions. So not necessarily in the correct order. I'd like to, Amy Baxter, who is commissioning editor of Aevitas Books, I'd like you to say a few words about yourself.
Yes, hello. I'm Amy Baxter, commissioning editor at Aevitas Books at HarperCollins. I commission quite broadly. I commission commercial fiction, so that's rom-coms, that's historical fiction, that's crime and thriller. I also am editor-in-chief of a magazine called Bad Form, which is a platform by and about writers of colour in my spare time because I just love books and writers. Before Aevitas and HarperCollins, I was at Dialogue Books at Hachette, which is a division which specialises in publishing marginalised voices, so that's queer voices, working class voices, POC voices, anything is marginalised in this country, which is a lot of people, actually, it turns out, shockingly. And before that, I was at Penguin, Michael Joseph. So yeah, I publish quite broadly. I like commercial fiction, and yeah, the only thing I don't really do is non-fiction.
Great, thank you. And we also have here Leodora Darlington, who's founder of Owned Voices and also publishing director at Orion Fiction.
Hello, very happy and excited to be here and talking to you all. So yes, I'm publishing director at Orion Fiction. Before that, I used to work in non-traditional publishing, so I was at Amazon Publishing, before that at Indie, and before that at Bookashore, which is a digitally focused publisher. I publish quite widely across the commercial range, probably quite similarly to you, Amy. I love things that are crime. I've also published romance, historical fiction. The only thing I don't do is non-fiction, really.
It's a good line, right?
It's a good line, I'm stealing that. And yes, as mentioned, I'm also founder of Owned Voices, which is an organisation I founded with the aim of helping bring more unheard voices to mainstream audiences. So we started with workshops. We've run the Owned Voices Novel Award for a couple of years. This has been a quieter year for us, but we've got some exciting things in the works, which I'm excited to announce in the coming weeks. And that's enough from me, I reckon, for now.
Great, thank you. We also have Clara Foster, literary agent at Aevitas Creative Management. Could you say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So I'm Clara. I am, as said, a literary agent at Aevitas Creative Management UK. We're a transatlantic firm, so actually we started in the States, but we've got a really sort of up-and-coming, growing team based in London, and actually one of us in Barcelona, which is quite exciting. So as opposed to Amy and Leodora, I, as an agent, work sort of intermediarily between the writers and the publishers. So I am really looking to take on some really new and exciting voices at the minute, pretty much across the board. I do actually work a little bit in non-fiction, some narrative, some kind of practicable guide-based stuff, and then I also love working with up-and-coming debut fiction writers. So I love sort of very emotional literary women, and I love all the stuff that's like almost mainstream but has a little bit of a genre twist. I love a good bit of fantasy, a little bit quirky, and really it's my job to sort of help writers make their work the best it can be and then sell it in to publishers and let the publishers do their job. So that's me.
Great, thank you, Clara. And we do have an empty chair, I'm afraid. We were going to have Jonathan Ruppin from the Ruppin Agency, but unfortunately he's not very well, so he's not able to join us. So you've just got women today, I'm afraid. So I'm going to kick off with some questions, and whoever feels they want to answer first, we can do it that way if you would like. So the first question is, what's the process for approaching you with a manuscript?
Should we give it to you first as the agent, and then we can chime in?
Yeah, that seems like a good way to do things. So, like I said, I always say with agents, as a kind of glib answer, we're glorified middlemen. We do more than that. We are important. But so to get to the publishers, you sort of generally have to come through us first. And what that means is more often than not, as somebody who represents fiction, I find manuscripts in my submissions inbox, query inbox. So I work through a platform called Query Manager, but some agents just have specific email addresses. And what happens is you guys, writers, send us a query letter, so like a cover letter for your work, usually a sample of your work, maybe the first 30 pages, and then a synopsis. And I get probably 300 to 400 queries a month, which I then read. If I love somebody's submission, I'll say, look, I thought that was great, can you send me the full manuscript? By the way, do have a full manuscript before you start querying. If they send me the full manuscript and I love it, I'll say, okay, I'd like to represent you. At which point, if you've been querying sort of a whole different bunch of agents, you'll probably want to let them all know that you've got an offer so that and everyone can sort of say, oh, actually, I do want to represent you, or oh, I don't think you're quite right for me, and then you've got as many offers on the table and as many options open to you as possible, and then you choose who you want to work with. That's pretty much the process. There are other ways to find an agent. I was actually at a Creative Futures event last night, and I had someone read their work from an anthology, and I went up to them straight after, and I said, look, I loved your work, I want to work with you. So there are other ways to find us, and there are other ways for us to find you. But the most kind of equal and accessible is the submissions inbox, and that is, I think, the first point of call for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally in publishing, like you do take, as a commissioning editor, I'll take mostly from agents. Most publishers are closed to unagented submissions. For context, in terms of agented submissions, I get 40 to 50 a month, and these are from agents I know and trust, like Clara. We'll go for coffee like once every couple of months, and I'll be like, who have you got coming up? And she'll be like, this person's coming up. So there's like a lot of work that agents put into it, into flagging. But I also do have an open submissions inbox. I don't like publicizing it that much because it's scary how many emails I get. So I would flag that when you are approaching people, Avon does have that. Make sure you're approaching the right person about your work. If you're approaching me with a non-fiction, I'm just going to reject you if I have time to send you a rejection email. Please send, if people have open submissions boxes, do some research first. It's usually like quite available on their websites, what they're interested in. Always worth checking their Twitter or X.coms. Most publishers, editors have them. Please do not DM me your manuscript. I will not download it from my DMs. But the other way, I also commission authors is not from a manuscript. I do a lot of IP projects. An IP project is an intellectual property project. That's where I come up with a book idea. I run it past my sales teams, rights teams, whatever. And then I normally just put a tweet out, and I'm like, then I want to write a book. I can give you a few grand. It'll be fun. And then people message me. I just signed someone off the back of that. I posted about it on Twitter 3 weeks ago, and now she's got a book deal. So IP projects can be a really fun way if you're not sure, if you've not quite finished your manuscript yet, you're not sure this is like your book, not your great British novel or whatever it is you want to write. But you want to write a book, that can be a fun way into it sometimes that less people know about. But yeah, otherwise I just go to agents because they do a lot of the hard work for us as editors.
I think there's quite a lot of, agents tend to get to know what your taste is like, so a lot of that filtering is done for you. So then, lucky us as editors, we're mostly seeing stuff that is within our wheelhouse in the first instance, so it's really helpful. I think most of it's already been said. I think one other place I've previously found authors is through Twitter pitch events. I confess I don't participate as much as I used to, but things like hashtag PitMad or hashtag DVPit, which is for underrepresented voices specifically. As an author, you can go onto, X as it now is, and tweet a pitch for your book, and then an agent or an editor who would accept an unagented author would then like it, and then you can send them your manuscript. So actually one of my bestsellers I found through a Twitter pitch event. So they're different avenues, but I generally say that it's always a good idea to find a great agent.
I should also add to that point. Can you guys hear me still? Yes? Okay, fabulous. I should just also add to that do look out for those pitch contests. You're absolutely right, but a lot of them, because Twitter's now X and X is going down the drain, they're like migrating to different platforms. So I've missed a couple recently because one was on Discord and one was on Blue Sky, and I don't have Blue Sky. And so just keep an eye out if you're going to be querying in the next year or so. Keep an eye out for like where those contests are, what's going on, and just be aware also that it's a little bit up in the air at the minute.
I think a very, very good point.
Yeah.
And also a good point is that anyone can then like your pitch. So just also do some research about who you send your stuff to, whoever crops up. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So if someone is sending you a manuscript and a cover letter, what are you looking for? What tips can you give around those submissions?
I think Amy already covered one of the biggest ones, which is make sure you know who you're querying. So when you send something to someone, the first thing that you have to do is be sure that A, it's to their taste, or at least it could be to their taste. It's a bit of a guessing game sometimes, but know as best you can. And B, you want to make sure that they know that you know who they are. So when I get a query and it's not addressed to me and it's clearly a form query that has been sent to a whole bunch of different agents and it's not really the stuff I'm looking for, which I say what I'm looking for on my website, that has already not made me feel great about the query. So you're disadvantaging yourself from the off because I know you haven't put the effort in, and if you haven't put the effort in, what am I doing here spending my free time reading all these queries? So it's really important, and it's really nice to get a query that says, actually, this is my book, this is how long it is, this is what it's about. I really want to work with you because that, as agents, makes us really pleased because we know that you've looked into us and you want to work with us specifically. So that opening letter is pretty important. It's not 100% like the most important thing, because as long as I feel like you've made an effort, if it's not like the best query I've ever seen, I don't mind. I'm more interested in the sample, the manuscript. So like a great cover letter, a great query will advantage you more than a not great query will disadvantage you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is as an agent, I choose my projects as a reader, as a consumer. So I am always looking for, what would I want to read? What would I want to buy? And as a consumer, I'm a pretty fickle reader. When I pick up a book in a bookshop, the things that get me are the blurb, which is basically what you should be doing in your query letter, and then the first couple of pages, which is your sample, which means that the opening couple of paragraphs, the first few 100 words, are possibly the most important part of the query process. So look at your opening page again and again and again. Have other people read it, because you want to get that right.
Yeah, I can't underline this enough. Your first page has to be your best page, even with your agented submissions. As Clara says, I don't have time to read submissions at work or really after work. I'm usually reading my pitches from agents at like 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night with a glass of wine in hand. If I don't like that opening paragraph, I could be watching Love Island. I have things to do and places to be. I don't say that to be cruel. I just mean that these are instant decisions and it's all very personal ultimately. So just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not good, just a flag. But that's also why, yes, your hook is so important. I think for me, because I do commercial fiction, maybe Leodora can talk to this a bit more as well, that one-line pitch is so, so important. Can you summarize your book in a sentence? I say this for commercial fiction and non-fiction. This is not true of literary necessarily. If you can't summarize it in a sentence, you're not there to be querying yet. You're not there to publish your book. You're just not ready. And a fun exercise, which you haven't asked for, but I'm going to tell you anyway, just in case anyone's in this space where they've written a book but are thinking about pitching it, was when I was taught when I was at Penguin on how to write copy. It's like bigger, smaller. Write 50 words. Handwrite is much easier if you can and are able to write 50 words. Don't have to be full sentences of like stuff about your book. And then do that in, say, 10 minutes. Then give yourself half an hour to write a 100-word blurb. And then give yourself 10 minutes to write a 10-word sentence, which summarizes your book. The reason you do it in that process is it just subconsciously gets your mind whirring and like connecting things. I don't know how science works, but you get what I mean. So 50 words, 100 words, 10 words. And that 10-word one sentence should really hook you. I'm struggling to think of any right now because obviously my mind's gone completely blank. But the way you can describe a film or a book that you really love really quickly? That's what I need to be able to do to sell it to sales, rights, my boss, Waterstones, Amazon. All these people will need that one-line pitch because ultimately when it gets to that point when the book's being sold in, the sales team have like 2 minutes per book to sell it. So if we don't have that one line to use, it's just never going to get further down the line. So I'd say, funnily enough, your book is not necessarily the most important thing when you're querying. It's actually that pitch, which is slightly depressing to say, but I think good to know in advance.
I think that angle of, the easier you make it, and again, it's from a commercial standpoint, but the easier you make it for that person to see how to sell your book, the easier it is for them to say, hey, this is something I want to run with. And thinking about when I used to have an open submissions inbox, I think something that was quite helpful, and it's a bit of a poison chalice, this word, but comps, and bear with me, already heard Amy groaning. But when I'm talking about comps, they're comparative, and not necessarily just titles. When people focus very narrowly on comparative books, I think it can be quite challenging because the publishing industry and the books that are out there are quite homogenous. But even if you say to me, this is sort of Squid Game meets, and this is a book, but Bridgerton, I don't know what that book would be, but you've got a bit of a sense already of what that story is, who the audience might be, who you might be wanting to sell it to. So that is quite helpful. So even if it's not necessarily a book, but there's some kind of media that you can say, oh, it's a bit like this meets this, it's really actually quite helpful.
Actually, on that point, I'd also just like to spend your time doing that research on those comps. How many books have I had pitched to me comp to Lord of the Flies? Boring, didn't like that in school, don't want to read it now. If you comp it to Yellow Jackets, now I'm paying attention. Basically the same concept, one is cooler than the other. I appreciate this is, again, a very specific type of fiction, but if you're like a historical fiction writer, like don't comp it to Schindler's List, like see what's doing well in the market. You can look on Amazon charts and stuff, you can find a book, even if you haven't read it, that's in a similar area. You can be a bit more, like guys do with your comp titles. Please don't comp it to Queenie. You've not written Queenie, I beg of you. I say this to agents as well. You've just not written the next Queenie. But apart from that, everything else is fair game, I think, in terms of zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think agents use that as well. So if you can come up with a really great comp, it makes it easier for us. But also with your comps, try and don't say I've written the next this. Say it's got the, claustrophobia of this book and the prose of this book, and also you can sort of do it on vibes. So I had a manuscript that I lost out on, and I'm still really sad about it, but it gave me one of my favorite pitches, which is that I tried to explain it to someone and I couldn't work out how to do the blurb or the one-liner, so I just said, look, it's an adult Enola Holmes by way of the Essex Serpent with gender nonsense, and everyone went
Literally love.
So, as an example, I was really proud of that, and I'm really sad that I didn't get to use it and sell it to agents because they went.
That's a really good pitch.
I was so excited. But if you can do that, if you can give the quote unquote vibes, you're in.
I have to say, one of the most amounts of money I paid for a book, which was earlier this year, was because the agent literally emailed me, bisexual, magical Bridgerton. I got the email. I hadn't read the rest of the pitch. I was in an acquisitions meeting, and I said, I have a book in, and it's bisexual, magical Bridgerton. And my boss was sold. And I spent a lot of money on that book. If you can get it down, it really just makes everyone's life a lot easier.
I now want to know what that is.
Yeah, I want to know what that is.
Alternative is so good. Yeah.
So if you feel that you're not able to get to that, it's like people talk about the elevator pitch, making sure you've got that. If you feel you're not able to get, kind of what you've described, I guess you need to have some good friends or some good colleagues that can help you sum it up in that kind of way.
I should also say that, Amy and Leodora have said, this is very commercial. If you're writing literary, it doesn't need to be that big or that hooky. I have some colleagues who really only do very literary and experimental projects, and it doesn't work the same way. So in that sphere, it's all about, quite often, the feeling. And actually they'll start by saying it's, the prose is like this, or the feeling's like this, or it reminds me of the style of. So think about, and I think this comes back to knowing your own book and knowing the market. And I think what you'll hear from us today is a sort of big reminder that publishing is a real business. So what you have to do is think about where your book sits in the market. You don't have to know everything, that's our job. As agents, that's our job, to help you frame it and place it. But from the off, you want to go, okay, am I working in commercial? Am I working in genre? Am I literary? Am I upmarket? Am I book club? And from there, that will not only help you target the people you want to submit to, it'll also help you work out how to pitch.
Because odds are you probably haven't invented a new genre. I don't say that to be cruel. I just say that because most people think they have, because they've just not looked up enough books. It's always just worth checking, because there's a lot of books out there, and someone might have written something vaguely similar at some point in history.
This is also a really dry point and not a very sexy one, and it slightly touches on what we're talking about in terms of personalising and making sure your submission is for the right person. But also, if there are guidelines, if it's annoying that they say they want Times New Roman 12, size 12, just do it anyway. Just otherwise, you're relying on the charity and the good grace of someone to overlook you not following the instructions and with your submissions. And it's usually, whenever there's an open door submission policy, there's lots and lots they're looking at, and they're very tired and overworked. Don't give them an excuse to go no.
We're not here for the money. We're here because we love books. And it doesn't sound like it right now, but we really are here because we love books and we love working with writers.
Yeah, and Leodora's right, and the reason people put those guidelines in is to help them. And if you're helping them, then you're helping you, because the more time we save not having to reformat or see where something is or look for the bit that's missing, the more time we can spend actually looking at the work that we're being sent. So that's really, really important. And by the way, as a totally kind of ancillary, like slightly left field, but if you're submitting to agents, please, 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 please try and keep your manuscript under 100,000 words.
Yes.
If I see 130,000 words,
I'm not gonna read it.
I'm like, I'll have a look.
She's so much nicer than I am. I'm like, no.
Well, yeah, but because by the time it gets to you, we've done the cutting. I will have a look, but your work is going to have to be like the best thing I've ever read for me to want to ask for the rest, if it's over 100,000 words.
Just to flag, also for non-fiction, you don't need to write more than 3 chapters. You don't need a finished manuscript. A lot of this is specific to fiction. If you're writing non-fiction, you need a detailed outline. I'd aim for 8 pages, not double-spaced, with the chapter breakdown. 3 chapters written, because often I used to do a bit of non-fiction memoir, they'll want to work with you on shaping that.
Yeah, and
so,
we sell non-fiction on proposal.
Yes, you sell it
so
on
you
proposal.
don't need the full manuscript by the time it goes to editors.
To flag. But also, if you've already written it, well, that's not a bad thing either, just to mention.
Also one other caveat, if you are writing science fiction or fantasy, that's probably the one exception in terms of word count. I mean, I still prefer it wasn't huge.
Yeah, even though
But,
I've seen 150,000 word fantasies and gone, I don't think I have time.
Oh, I accidentally read a 400,000 word fantasy book the other day. It was on Kindle. I was like, why is this taking me
Kindle
so
Unlimited.
long?
Kindle Unlimited is crazy for that, because you'll be scrolling and it's mad.
So you might actually have just answered this next question, but we'll see. So what's the most common mistake people make when they're approaching you?
Being rude.
Oh, yeah.
The number of emails I get from people, because I do spend a lot of time like working, like doing free events, doing free work and mentoring and things. The number of people who will send me their manuscript and then like 48 hours later be like, how dare you not respond to me? And I'm like, well, I'm going to tell every editor I know about this person being nasty to me, because that's the kind of petty I am. No, I probably won't do that, but it's not going to make me respond any faster. It's being rude and aggressive is just not going to help. If I'm giving you feedback, I've taken my time out of my day in order to do that for you. It's not because it's personal. I don't hate you as a writer. It's just because I have some critique or I want to help. So I think being polite really goes a long way, just because so many people aren't, I'd say.
Yes, I think politeness does go a long way.
Yeah.
I think, generally speaking, just thoroughness in terms of research. So it is, again, making sure it's going to the right person, thinking about own voices, for example, making sure they have read the guidelines and they're submitting what you're asking for. It sounds so basic, but when you've read a submission, you can tell they've done a lot of work and they really want it to be you, and they've done everything right. That does just put your best foot forward.
Well, it's not just that. I think you want to work with people who will put the work in. I think ultimately, like Clara said, like, this is a business. Like, I am here because I love books. I could be a lawyer or something. I probably could be a lawyer, but like, you get what I mean. Like you need to work with people who are professionals, even though they're creators and writers and artists, and I really do respect that. You need to be able to say, like, this is a business person, they can take feedback, they can implement it, they can follow basic instructions. Like, that is important to whether or not I buy you, not just because I love your work, but because I think that I can spend the next 2, 3, 4 years working with you.
Yeah, and also I think it's really important with that politeness, with that thoroughness, because publishing is a business of relationships. So we need to be able to work with you not only to know that you'll do the job, but to know that you understand that it's a business and you want to work with us in a polite and enthusiastic but courteous way, and that you believe in your writing, but that you're not going to, demand that everyone drops everything else for you. And that comes back to also with the queries. Get across how confident you are about your book, but to help yourself, people swing one of two ways sometimes, and it makes my job harder because then I don't really know what to do with it. I either get people who open their queries going, sorry for wasting your time. I'm like, if you think that I'm wasting your time, why am I reading this? Or, and it happens very occasionally, it's not usual, but occasionally you get someone who goes, this is the next Gillian Flynn. I am a Pulitzer, going to be a Pulitzer winner. This is going to win every prize. And I'm like, value your work, but not like that.
Look, I respect the confidence so much. If you don't believe it, then who will? However, the odds of me reading that and being like, that sounds like a cool, chill, fun person to work with and spend my evenings and weekends working with, pretty slim. Sometimes you just have to do it because the book's that good, but it's rarely worth it, shall we say.
And you know what? The work should speak for itself.
Yeah.
I don't need you to tell me if the work's that good and I'm a good enough agent, I will see that it's that good.
If you've got that one sentence, I can edit a book.
Yeah.
I can add a plot line. I can cut it down to 75,000 words. You've got a good idea and you're nice to work with. Ultimately, that's what I'm looking for.
It's important, yeah. It's important.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so this is my last question. So what advice would you give writers just starting out?
Just starting out's a funny one because just starting out in the querying process, or just starting out as I want to write a manuscript. I guess it's two slightly different things. I think if you're just starting out as being I think I want to be a writer, my first piece of advice to you is just check that you really want to be a writer. You'll have heard from all of us today and heard of all of us going, it's a business, this is really difficult, this is what you have to do, it's lots of rejection, yada, yada, yada. And it's true. Publishing's not an easy business. It's not the most lucrative business. So if you're here, there is money in publishing. Make no bones about that. There is money if you can find it. And there is always the possibility that you will be able to make writing your full-time career. The opportunity is there. It doesn't happen for everyone, but it's there. But getting there is really difficult. Really, really difficult, and it doesn't happen for everyone. So if you're new and you think maybe you want to be an author, think really hard about how much time it's going to take, how much money you may or may not make, what you want from your writing career. Are you writing because you just love it? Are you writing because you want to make money? Are you writing because you want the prestige? All of those are fine reasons to be writing, great reasons to be writing. But if you want to write because you want to make money, then you have to go commercial. You have to do what Amy's asking of you, what Leodora's asking of you. If you're writing because you want the prestige, just know that there's a good chance that the prize-winning books don't always make that much money.
Or sell.
Yeah. So just when you're new, make sure you know what you want and why you want it, and that you're willing to go through the slog of it. This is a process that could take years, maybe more. And at the end of it, you might have a published book, you might have won a prize, you might have no money at all. It's, in some ways, one of the worst things about publishing, that we exist for authors, and yet we can't always make authors the money they deserve. And it really is something that I think all of us up here, I can't speak for you two, but it's something I struggle with, because I believe that people should be able to make a living from their art.
I think it's an interesting point. I feel like we're talking about money. Let's get specific. This is all freely available information online, but I'm just telling you because it's not often collated in one place. Can I just get a general gist? How do people know about the advance structure? Do people know how you get paid for books? No. I see one nod, one shaky hand. Okay. When your book is bought, you don't get a fee. What you get is an advance. So I, Amy of Avon, HarperCollins, believe that you will make £1,000 worth of royalties. Actually, I think you're probably going to make a bit more than that, but my finance team has allowed me to tell you I think you're going to make £1,000 of royalties. So I will pay you £1,000 in advance of us publishing that book. That's why it's called an advance. This advance is split. 10% goes to your agent. It is also...
15. Sorry? 15.
15%. 15% goes to your agent.
That is industry standard, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Agents take 15%.
It is then split into 4. You get 25% on signature of your contract, which realistically can take a couple months. 25% on delivery of manuscript. That's after you've done the edits, because sometimes people just don't like doing those. You get 25% on hardback publication, should or first format publication. Again, this depends on like how you're getting published. And 25% on paperback publication. Often, in traditional publishing, not how I work now, but how I used to work, for example, at Penguin, that process takes about 2 years. Unless I've given you a 2-book deal for that £1,000, in which case it's divided into 7. Technically 8, but you get that lump and signature up first. The average advance payment in the UK as of 2022 was less than £12,000. That does not take into account multi-book deals. You are not going to make any money. And the only time you get royalty payments is when you've earned me back that £1,000 worth of £1 royalties. Does that make sense? So, yeah, I wouldn't say it makes sense, but basically it means that people talk about royalty payments a lot, about that extra pound you get per book. I only pass those on to you once you've made me my £1,000 back.
So, yeah, just to clarify, a royalty is usually somewhere between, 8 and 12% of the purchase price. So if you go into a shop and buy a book for $16.99, the author only gets between an average of 10% of that $16.99 that you pay.
So monetarily, we're talking very, very, very low wages for you. This is not a working wage. This is not a living wage. This is a fun thing for you to do on the side. Okay, you do hear about people with 6-figure deals. Like
they do happen.
They do happen. Every author signed through bad form until this year went for a 6-figure deal. Right for me. I make you money. But, you know, often, like in my job at Avon, because we are high volume, give high royalty rates, the average amount I give to authors is 10 grand. I say this as someone who's given 6-figure deals to people before at previous jobs. All this to say, I just wanted to give you some firm numbers so you knew what we were talking about when we're talking low money. It is low money. Like, it's really, this is bonus money. This is not going to pay your bills, which is depressing. So yes, it's why it's important for you to cling on to something, which is like, why are you writing? Is it because you want your writing out there? Wanting to have your name on a book, on a shelf, is a very valid reason to want to be published. I get that. And if that's enough for you, then that's enough for you. You know, you need to have something.
I mean, I think I'm going to just echo what you guys have already said. I think figuring out what it is that you want, and then figuring out the sort of authors who are doing that and being really aware of who your contemporaries are and reading your contemporaries and looking at what they're doing, I think that's really, really sensible. And it'll give you sort of framework of what to expect, and also sort of a framework of steps to follow in. But yeah, it's good to have that ambition there, but also that really clear clarity of purpose. I think just one interesting tangent in terms of payments and royalties and structures, because I used to work in non-trad. I'll talk a bit about what non-trad deals can look like. So when I'm talking about non-trad, I'm talking about digital publishers, namely Amazon and Bookshare, where I worked before. So that tends to be Amazon's different because they do pay advances, but other digital publishers don't pay advances. So you get no advance, but you get a higher royalty rate. The interesting thing there, having looked at the royalties, the authors I used to work with at Bookshare, they are higher than most trad authors that I've seen thus far, because you're looking at a royalty rate of more like 45%. Yeah. So it's just an interesting thing, but then you'll never see your book on a bookshelf unless you end up in a rare deal where some trad publisher comes on and says, okay, we want to do a print edition of that. But that's so rare. So I think, again, it's figuring out what you want. If what you want is to make money, yes, it's commercial publishing, and it might be
digital,
It might be digital, it might be trad. It's just, have a think about the different options that are
the point
available.
is, I guess, that there are lots of routes.
So many.
And that, there is an advanced structure that, actually, the advanced structure Amy mentioned is one publishers like, it's one agents don't like. We prefer, splitting the advance fewer times. Yeah. So those are like fights that we have. So the important thing is that these are general outlines and some ideas, but because publishing isn't as regulated as it could be, which in some ways I'm pleased about. No, okay. It's not, because publishing isn't regulated at all, which, has its pros and cons. It means that there's room to maneuver, there's room to do things differently if you're sort of able to step outside the box and do them differently. So it's really important to explore all your options and work out what the best one is for you.
Yeah, like all forms of publishing are valid. Like a hardback is not the be-all and end-all of publishing, and I really feel like you know, like publishing an ebook is very valid and very exciting, and most people in this country who are buying books buy ebooks. Like that's how most people read. You know, you might get to more people publishing that way than publishing a £25 hardback that no one can afford. You know, really have a think about what is important to you.
And some people have audio exclusives, like Audible do this thing where they pay in advance and you can only find the book in audio, but
which is interesting.
it is interesting, and you know, after a certain period of time you can put it in print or whatever. But audio is such a growing market. So many people listen to audiobooks now that for some authors, especially with, you know, because these advances come from Amazon, sometimes the advances are really high. Sometimes the advances are 4 or 5 times the amount of money
I think I would
you'd
sell
get.
out to Amazon. If
From a traditional publisher. So there are people who are like, okay, I won't see my word on the page, but I will get all this money, and technically I'll still be published, and people will still be reading my book.
And you can write another book. You can take that money, take a year out, write another book, and get it traditionally published.
I will clarify that Audible play really, really well. Amazon publishing specifically, fine. It's what you'd get from a trad publisher.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think if anything, they're more conservative. If there was a big 6-figure auction, I wouldn't be in it at Amazon.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Right, I'm going to stop you there because we now want to open it out to the audience to ask some questions. We've got 20 minutes left. So thank you. That was lots of really useful information and guidance, and thank you.
I hope we haven't terrified you.
So yes, does anyone have any questions? And also it'd be fantastic to know, you don't have to, but it'd be great to know who you are and, you know, to add some context to your question as well. Thank you. So can you also wait for the microphone, because some people have had some trouble hearing as well.
Yes, thank you so much for that, because it was excellent. I'm actually a doctor of medicine, and I started writing because I wanted to write an expose on the National Health Service. I tried my best to get it out to a publisher, an agent, and I couldn't. So I published it on Amazon. It's called Murder in Medicine: Chilling Tales of the National Health Service, Secrets of a Horrified Doctor. And it's absolutely true. But in order not to get sued, I fictionalized everything. It is, I'm afraid, over 100,000 pages. But it actually tells patients how to deal with situations when they come across it. So for example, if you're being told one thing and you don't like it, you just get up and walk out of the hospital and go somewhere else. But after I wrote that book, I published it on Amazon. And then I just loved writing, and I've written 6 books so far, but I've not been able to crack the scene. I'm on my 7th book now, and the other 6 are published on Amazon because I just cannot get into getting an agent and getting my message across. Do you have any advice on that?
I think what was really interesting about the book you just told us about is that the title and the subtitle you gave us were about how horrifying the NHS was, and then what you gave was quite an interesting message that the book actually is telling you about how you as a person can deal with the NHS. And those sounds like 2 different ideas to me. If I got that first book, I'd say, well, post Adam Kay, there were a huge range. I was working in nonfiction at that point. There was a huge range of doctor-led books. I worked on a few. You were quite right to fictionalize that because the legal situation with patient-doctor confidentiality is really difficult. So there was a period where people weren't interested in them anymore because a lot of them failed post Adam Kay.
I think my book came out before Adam Kay.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. So yeah, someone always works, and it tends to be a white man. That's by the by. I'd say that your pitch was not as compelling as the content of the book that you just spoke about. If I had that pitch come across my desk personally, I'd be like, this is really depressing. We're going into a recession. Who is going to want to, you know, who's going to want to read this? But if you'd said to me, it's really depressing, but there's an angle on how we can take action as people, how we can have more impact on NHS, how we can change things, how we can advocate for ourselves. Well, that's a hook. I've not read that book. You know, I think it goes back to what is your hook? What makes you different? What is going to make people want to read this? And I think, like, ultimately your book might be very good, and if you've written 6, clearly you have something to say, but often getting an agent or an editor is just about perfecting that one line, I'm so sorry, because it might just be the people who haven't even opened the manuscript because they've read that and they said, well, I've read that book already, unfortunately, because it's just of time constraints and stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd agree with that. Fun fact, we also publish on MK, but just something to add.
He sounds great. I enjoyed This Is Going to Hurt very much.
But I'd just say to add to that, like, if you've gone straight to self-publishing, I wonder how many opportunities for feedback you've had. And obviously we've not had the opportunity to see the material itself, but I think feedback, if you can find it, is a really great place to start. Most of the writing groups I know about tend to be for underrepresented writers like Black girl writers and also Asian women writers, but I think find yourself a group, some peers, share your stuff, get some feedback, and I think that will probably help. But also, some people have written 12 books before they land a publishing deal. It's tough out there.
Yeah. The good literary agency give feedback on every manuscript they receive. It may not be the most specialised, but they'll give you a gist and they'll get back to you within 60 days. So if you're in that position, but they're also just a really great agency. They do really good stuff, but definitely worth sending to them because they will give you feedback. That's
Well, I just gave up on adult writing and and just finished a children's book. And I'm trying the children's agents now.
Thank you. So someone had their hand up there with the blue top. In the mid, yeah, you with the headscarf. Yeah. Thank you.
So my question would be, would you commit to a trilogy, for example, for 3 books that are connected to each other? Or do you think maybe it's too long commitment?
Potentially, I think, so I've commissioned like a 3-book series before in crime, but also I see my colleagues doing it in fantasy. If they're really excited about that first book, you don't have to have the other 2 written yet, but I think a pitch or a synopsis, if you can get that far, is great, but even a paragraph pitch is really useful, then that's the short answer, yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think I get a lot of this in my inbox. I do fantasy, so I just signed a fantasy writer, YA fantasy, and actually when I signed them, I thought it was going to be a trilogy. Now I think it's going to be a duology. Either way, it's fine, it works, I'm really happy to see it. Just the thing that I will not commit to is when actually it's not a trilogy, it's someone's just split a 250,000-word manuscript into 3, and it's not 3 standalone books. You need to be able to sell that first book as a novel. If the other 2 never got published, the first one would have to stand on its own.
Yeah.
So when you're doing a multi-book series, make sure that every book has the narrative arc, the start, the quest, the resolution. And even if it leaves questions, which it should if it's a trilogy for the next one, actually it needs to resolve enough that you could read any book in the trilogy technically on its own without any knowledge of the others and never read the other 2, and it would still be fine.
An excellent example of this is the Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer. I'm not joking. They all technically work as a series, but actually they're very good standalones. She gives very good introductions to the characters and where they are in their story in each book. I appreciate it's maybe not what you'd consider like the world's best novel. I really like them. But I just think it's a really good example of like a series that works as standalones. If you just read Twilight or just watched Twilight, you'd be happy with the ending of that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So with the black top here at the front, and then we'll go to the white top nearby. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. That was super helpful. I think something interesting you said is, I mean, obviously comps. So I'm in the middle of writing a fantasy YA novel at the moment, and every time I give it to someone to read, my parents, friends, they say, oh, this is like 300 meets Hunger Games. And I was like, no, it's not. It's different. It's not. It's Star Wars, but with gladiators and sand. And I always get really annoyed by that. And I'm kind of interested to hear about, like, first of all, I think things that you guys would be like, or are there things where you'd be like, no, I don't want to hear that? Like, I guess maybe like people saying there's young wizard boys, you know, like, we do not want to hear that anymore. Or myths retold, I think. Like, I'm interested to know if you guys would say we don't need to hear any more of, or we really want to hear more of 300 meets Hunger Games. 'Cause I have a book for you if you're looking for...
I have to say, I think your family and friends are doing you quite a service there and telling you what your book is. It's a good pitch. It's a really good pitch. I think it's so varied and so dependent on each agent, each editor. The answer from every single person would be totally different. For me personally, like, I don't necessarily want to see more police procedurals, because I think the market's saturated with them. But I'm conscious of how individual an answer is. I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I also think as agents and editors, we can like throw out all these rules. We can say, I want to see this or I don't want to see this. Actually, when something hits your desk and it's brilliant, you will throw that rule book out the window.
So true.
In a heartbeat. So I think what you really have to do is just, in some ways, stick to your guns in the first instance, in the writing process. Write the story that you feel needs to be told.
Yeah.
And then you go from there. Once the book exists, once it's a thing, then you go, okay, how am I going to market this? But for the most part, it's a bad idea to start writing with a market in mind.
In mind.
Like finishing a book is a huge achievement. So many people never reach that goal. Being published is a bonus, but it is ultimately determined by capitalism. Like that's what you have to keep in mind. You are creators. You shouldn't fit yourself into that mold. I say this as someone who publishes very commercially. Like my personal reading taste is so varied and so wide, and just because I wouldn't publish it doesn't mean I wouldn't read it. So it's very hard for me to be like, yes. I mean, like, yes, admittedly, I'm not really looking for any myth retellings. I just don't think I can sell that internally right now. But then again, if someone came up to me and had like a retelling of like, it's actually like a Hindu myth particularly that I'd like a retelling of, like I would jump at it. So it's
My first big book that I ever sold was
Such
at my
a good
last
one.
agency. Oh,
Such a good
it
one.
came into my inbox and it was just slightly at the cusp. I think now we've reached, for the minute, a saturation.
Yeah.
I think in a couple of years, we'll get back into retellings because retellings never go away. That's just how people work. But my first ever book, and the thing that I loved about it was that we'd had, since Madeline Miller really kind of sort of repopularized Greek female mythological retellings at the end of the 2010s. I got this in my inbox at the end of 2021, I think, and it was dual perspective. It was a love story with a happy ending that was still a retelling, and I went, I'm in. It felt commercial, it felt fresh, it felt different, and I didn't mind that it was in the same trend because it felt fun and different enough, and the writing was good enough that I went, okay. And even now, I'm happy to see mythological retellings if it's like a Celtic retelling, or it doesn't have to be Greek, it doesn't have to be female. I'm slightly more averse to the books that are like, oh, this unheard woman from history, because
I quite like those.
well, so again, there's so much difference
quite a
of
lot of
opinion.
those. Yeah, I do quite a lot.
Should we also tell the audience the big book so they can all go buy it?
Oh yeah, it's really good.
Oh, it's called Psyche and Eros. It's by Luna McNamara. She's not my client
Which we
anymore
also
because I left the
publish.
company. I was out, but buy it anyway. She's a delight. Her book's
banger.
great.
Yeah.
It's really
It's a
good.
love story. It's like a mythological rom-com. It was great. But so, so here I am saying I don't really want to see those, unheard voice from history.
And I'm like, yes, please.
Yes, because to me they feel done. I want women in history to sparkle without having to be like, oh, here's her story. I want it sort of threaded through the other narratives that I'm seeing. But again, that's really personal. So write what you have, write what you want, and then once it's written, use the comps that other people are giving you, because quite often when you're the writer, you can't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah.
And it's the other people around you. It goes back to what Amy was saying about feedback, or Leodora was saying about feedback. You need feedback from outside sources. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thank you guys so much for your time. My grandpa was in the FBI, and I believe I inherited his investigative strengths. But you guys keep talking about, try to tailor it to me, make sure it's something I like. And you all have different tastes, and it's wonderful. What evidence am I looking at? Should writers at their desks, when they're trying to figure out, who's gonna like my work? How do we figure that out, other than Google, agents?
No, that's
Please
a really good question. I think there are a couple of resources out there, stuff like Jericho Writers, stuff like the Writers and Artists Yearbook. There's also, Googling's good. Google the agencies. Google is your friend. And then once you're on an agency page, if you're querying agents, what you want to do, I have a page on Aevitas Creative Management which says what I'm looking for. It says, I want to see this in this genre, this in this genre. I loved these 3 books, and hopefully that'll give you, if you know the books, that'll give you an idea of the kind of prose style and the vibe that I like. I haven't seen this. And then if, somebody has an agent has their client list on their page as well, you can look at their client list. What have their clients written? Because that will tell you what they want and what they're looking for. Because as an agent, actually, it's not like in a publishing house where editors have to look at like a whole list. Ooh,
Yeah.
I keep hitting this. Editors have to look at a whole list, which means if they already have one of something, they can't have a second thing that's too like it. Agents don't have that problem. We can just take on literally whatever we like. So if I'm really in the mood for like a historical thriller, I can take on 3 historical thrillers at once and sell them all to different publishing houses, which is great for me. So just look at what people say they want. So it comes back to the research and the guidelines. And
Yeah, I think for me, the way I found agents that I wanted to connect with as an editor, I did some fun physical research. I went to Waterstones, I found the books I liked, and I looked at the acknowledgements pages.
Yes.
The agent is almost always mentioned there. They're probably not their agency. You just Google that. If you like that book and your book is similar to that book, there's a good agent for you. And often they have their editor named as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes they dedicate their books to their editors, and that's really nice. It's nice when that happens. But normally it's just the acknowledgements. So yeah, that's also quite a good way to do that quite quickly.
I do that.
I'm conscious of time, the fact we've got a lot of more questions, so I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you.
Great advice already given.
Do my job for me, thank you.
That's all right.
So we have the lady over here with the blue or white top on. Thank you.
Looks blue to me.
Hi, sorry, I'm going a little bit of a different path, but I'm a publishing student. So I was actually asking, we learned a lot about not being too focused on one specific area of publishing and too determined to go that way. So I guess I wanted to ask, when you guys got into publishing, did you guys already go straight, for example, assistant editor, or did you go a different path into a publisher and then go through it, or as a literary agent? Did you go straight into it? Did you work with publishers before and then go into it? How did you get there?
I'll do a quick whistle top of my career. I was actually working in education first, and then I did some experience at a few agencies and publishers, and then started as a publishing assistant and worked my way up. So I went publishing assistant, publishing executive, commissioning editor. Weirdly, my job title at Amazon was editor, but they've got a weird system, but it was equivalent of, I guess, associate publisher, and I'm a publishing director. Whistle stop tool.
Yeah, I went through a diversity scheme at Penguin. It's called The Scheme. It's a very inventive name. For editorial, I was actually meant to be an accountant. Delayed that for a bit to be an assistant, and lo and behold, here I am. Actually, the first job in publishing in editorial is not assistant editor, it's editorial assistant. Wouldn't bother applying to assistant editor roles. You need 1 to 2 years as an editorial assistant before you get there. I was very lucky, the scheme was editorial focused. Really, that was where I was meant to be. But yes, I'd say that when you're applying for publishing jobs, do anything subject assistant. Rights assistant, sales assistant, publishing assistant, editorial assistant, marketing assistant, publicity assistant. It's so much easier to move around once you're in. In my first job, full-time, when there wasn't a trainee or intern or whatever, as editorial assistant, there were 4 of us in that division, and all of us already worked at Penguin in some capacity. It was an HR assistant previously, marketing assistant, whatever. It's so much easier to move around. When I left my job as editorial assistant, there were 1,000 and something applicants to my job. So that's like a minimum wage editorial job. So really, yeah, foot in the door where you can, figure it out when you're there. Don't worry about it too much.
I will say, sorry to say more things after I promise to be short, but I think getting in and impressing people is so important. Total transparency, every single job I've had in publishing is because someone has said something nice about me to someone else, every single one. So I can't sort of overstate that. And that means even my entry-level job, I knew someone working in education who knew someone working in publishing, like, she's amazing, let her do some intern work. So total transparency, I had a help there. So
yeah, I think though, we're very, very rightly wary of nepotism now, but I think what's really important to remember is that there's a really big difference between nepotism, as in you've got like a friend of the family, and between a recommendation from somebody you've impressed in your working life. That's just relationships, and that's how publishing works. So just remember also that publishing is very small.
tiny.
So if you burn a bridge with somebody, everybody else is going to hear about it.
Great gossip.
So just know that you've got to keep all your relationships in line. The only other thing I'll say is that you can move laterally across. So you can move from an HR assistant to an editorial assistant. It's very unusual to move diagonally. So you're not going to move from an HR assistant to an assistant editor position. You can't really step. So if you do have to move laterally, it's going to take you longer than it would if you started first in that editorial role. I should also say my journey was that actually I've made some leaps. So I did quite a lot of internships and stuff, and I worked at HarperCollins for a bit in editorial and managing editorial, and that taught me that I did not want to be an editor. So I then found myself some experience in an agency for an internship, and then after I graduated, I managed a couple of months later. It took me 3 or 4 months of constant applying to find an assistant job, and I was really lucky because I got a whole bunch of experience, and I was allowed to progress really quickly in my last job, that I made that jump. I bypassed the sort of associate agent step.
Which we love for you.
So I went straight from assistant to agent, which is it's been
really
a ride.
thing.
It's been really exciting. There is, I'd say, pros and cons to everything, but in some ways, if you can work your way up step by step, it means you're supported the whole way.
Thank you very much. I can't... Sorry, take any more questions. We've got this big clock in front of us that you can't see that's going, wow. So it's basically saying we have to stop now. But thank you very much. That was amazing. I know there's loads more questions. We will do this event again. Thank you all for coming. That's the end of the day today.
Just a flag. I'll hang around for
we're going to be mingling,
outside,
so you can
grab
come and ask us your questions.
Politely grab us.
Politely grab us.
Not physically.
Great. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks for having us.